intuitive, internal. Okay, yes, more. High variation of branches or sub-branches. High variation subsystems. Western is more. There's three, probably three. There's ancient Greek or Greco-Roman. Then there's medieval/Catholic, and then there's Renaissance, early modern, or secular Enlightenment. And, then into the 1900s, but modern/early modern, medieval and antiquity, Greco-Roman, ancient Greek philosophy. So there's kind of two or three main cores here. More mystical too. Also talks about what Western never seems to talk about. In general, I know there are outliers on both sides. In general, it never seems to talk about direct experience as much as Eastern does. Also, direct experience more on this side. Also, yes, internal intuition, non-quantifiable. That's the word I'm looking for. That especially modern Western philosophy has a big problem because of this Enlightenment science thing, right? It deals a lot on this side, on the Eastern side, of non-quantifiable and direct experience. Whereas, again, at least I know again, there's probably special secret schools that are very esoteric Western philosophy, but the mainstream branch of Western philosophy, especially modern Western, is much more, at the risk of getting people, I don't mean this necessarily as a a totally bad thing, but it does seem to be much more on that side. So again, things, the fifth element and the void as well, right, on the east. Right. Emptiness, right? Again, never can. Yes, I'm sure there are secret, hidden schools maybe on the fringes of Western, but again, the mainstream, regular bulk branch of Western philosophy does not seem to really, at least in high detail, like the the bulk the bulk essence, the bulk focus of Eastern and bulk focus of Western, still recognising it as, again, as a lot of modern people like to say, and relativists, well, there are exceptions on both sides, yes, there are, in general. And also, having, again, it can be more there, might be a double N, I don't know. Right, it can be more on that side, but at the same time, there's hyper masculine self-discipline, fasting, and things like that in the Himalayas with the holy men and things. So there is a very extremely masculine man, but in general, in terms of like the thought process, so it's more about maybe thinking on this side and maybe feeling or doing on this side, especially and especially rational thought, even pre-Christian and pre-secular, going back to the pagan ancient Greeks, right? Still this heavy focus on this very masculine, very left brain logic kind of stuff. Again, horses for courses. I'm not saying one's inferior, one's superior. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form, but the general bulk focus on each. There's a general pattern, which neurotypicals don't like to hear, but anyway. So with the autistic pattern recognition, I'm quite good at recognizing certain patterns just by observation, and so there is more, as I say, of this. I mean, there is a Western word for the intuition, if you like, which would be called, or Christians might sometimes call, although I know Christianity is not a Western religion, but in the West, let's just say in the West, at least historically, there was this word, divine intervention. There may possibly be a pre-Christian pagan European word for divine intervention that I don't know about, but let's just say, if we want to use the Western word for the Eastern intuitive stuff, we could use the Western term divine intervention. Okay, so there is a sort of Western version of that of sorts, right? Or if you want, also, we could call divine revelation, right? But again, it's kind of the same thing, really. Again, neurotypicals will have a problem with it, but honestly, it does present itself as pretty much the same thing, which might be non-duality, right? That maybe, perhaps, again, just a theory, just a sort of neurodiverse theory, if you want, neurodiverse theory. Maybe it is two lenses. Same thing, so you're looking at two, say, different filters, maybe. You might be looking at like a kaleidoscope or something. You might be looking at the same object with two different colour filters from two different angles, like photography. So the same object, but taken from different angles makes it look like a completely different thing. So again, that might be, the non-duality side of things, right? And obviously the Tao, Dharma, Logos, right? If, again, just one of my personal neurodiverse theories, if it is non-dual and it is all the same thing, then then it doesn't really matter, Eastern or Western, because it'll come to the same conclusion because the truth reveals itself, right? It doesn't really matter. I think this one is probably more attractive to beginners, right? And Jung talked. See, I think the thing with Jung, as far as I can see, I'm no expert, but as far as I can see, in my opinion, maybe an attempt to westernize, which I don't think is I don't think can be done or should be done. But again, I suppose because of proximity in different cultures, things are seen through that light. Just because that's what's to hand, it's the closest distance to hand, so it makes sense efficiency-wise, right? But I don't think you can westernize it with the using like Western secular terms like subconscious and things like this. I think it's sort of, and Terence McKenna talks about the limits of human language and how human language pulls makes it 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 scientific reductionism. It sort of dirties and reduces it, and yeah, and the scientist Feynman says it doesn't, only adds to beauty, and that's fair enough. And I get all that side, and I'm no professor, of quantum physics or anything like that. No, but in my opinion, I think I would say it does take away from it. I would agree with Terence McKenna's estimation of that when you put language, you sort of, and obviously I'm not going to the too much extreme with it. Of course, you need to catalogue things, especially if you're a scientist or an academic or you're someone studying. You need certain ways of cataloguing things, obviously, because it would just be anarchy. But it's when it's taken too much to the extreme, and I think it's not good. And so, in the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao, the true Tao, right? The eternal. It's not the eternal Tao or the real Tao. So there is that thing of like you sort of pull it down, and a bit like the second Matrix film where he's in the train tunnel and he runs away, runs back, right? So there's this thing where when you try and hold it down and force it to be certain things, that it again produces this Newton's third law effect, sort of mystical version of Newton's third law, spiritual version, and it pushes back, and by trying to catch onto it, it slips away like water or jelly or something, right? Which again, flow as well, and water and things, elements, maybe things. I just don't see it. I just don't see these things, especially, as I say, especially this fifth element void and the study of emptiness. I don't see really, again, I know there's this modern Western psychology and modern Western philosophy of trying to make it westernized and trying to say it's, use these sort of secular scientific Western terms, but I think that's not it. That doesn't make sense to me. So, they can each learn from each other, but I mean, also, there's common sense, right? Now, no one ever mentions this, but I would tie this into intuitive intelligence or intuitive knowledge. You can have, like, okay, this would be more on the eastern side of the philosophy spectrum. You could have, old school blues players who might not necessarily, and I with music, I'm like this a bit. You don't know all those scientific mathematical style notations, right? You don't know all the symbols and the formulae and all these things, right? But you play with soul and you play by ear, and it really comes through to people, right? And you can play at a really high level. So it's a bit like left and right handed. It doesn't mean anything's inferior or better. But there is this very, in the modern Western sort of scientific reductionism attitude, there is this very snobby kind of thing that I don't think is healthy, of like, looking down on that style of, the right-brained or the non-quantifiable or the you know, an example of the music, there's someone who plays by ear or someone who plays with soul. You know, it's a pulling down. It's a sort of attitude problem that isn't productive. Again, I'm not saying anything. It's very important to study both, and definitely if you're like me, if you're very right brain, then probably Eastern first, Western second would be the best. Doing it only by itself, I'm not saying don't do. In my opinion, personally, that direction, east to west, rather than the standard direction of study for a Westerner would, if you're like, as I say, if you're like me, if you're very right brained and alternative and creative brain, then that would be the good direction. Doing solo Western or solo that, again, in my opinion, because of non-duality and because of the contrast, it's very interesting. But by all means, if you want to do solo Western by itself or solo Eastern by itself, you know, I'm just saying, in my opinion, that's how I would do it, especially if you were a right-brained creative type, alternative type, in my opinion. Or let's say I am a O. Yeah, in my autistic opinion, yeah, it's my correct lettering. But or we'll write it like this: small a, big O. Right, in my autistic opinion. I just invent words that, you know, like, well, we'll do a different one on personal orientation of spidergrams, because someone asked me how do I do my personal version of a spidergram, so we'll do that one day if anyone's interested. But these are just, again, Eastern and Western, and I don't know that much about Western really. I'm just very, very good at spotting gaps in things and empty space and things that aren't there. And as I say, a spot in Western that they never talk about. Emptiness, void. Again, yes, I know. Someone will point me to Jung and say, and I get all that, but it's a very West. Again, okay, I suppose every culture sees things in its own way, but it's not in the same. It's not the way. It's not really. That's not really a study of void, of emptiness in my esteem. Okay, and fine. If I'm wrong, that's fine. Okay, it doesn't matter because I can learn from these experiences anyway. That's how you learn. No one starts off at black belt level, right? Everyone starts off at the white belt, you know, on that level of, you know, skill level. So, you know, yeah, there is, I think what attracts certain, again, people to it may be the, you've got the intuition, so you don't need to read like thousands of books, right? And do essays and all this rigid stuff. Again, I'm not pulling it down. I'm just saying it's much more, in my opinion, at least for my brain type, inefficient. So it's a bit like self-explanatory, right? Right. This is what I say. Right. Self-explanatory. So something can be self-explanatory, right? Can it? I think so. Yes. So then you don't need to go into like a billion details, a zillion details. You know, it's like it again, common sense, right? It can, just like the music playing by ear, or doing things by feel. You might not know thousands of formulae on the mathematical side or on the physics side, but you know this feels this way and this will make this, you know, or maybe pre-modern architecture like that, you know, or, you know, things like that, right? So I suppose, and it's the argument for Tesla and Edison, that he would take all the hay straws and do them one by one, 10 bazillion of them, until he found the thing he was looking for. Whereas Tesla would just do the Formula E and do it shortcut, right? But if you're dyslexic, that would be much harder to do the formula, the science formula or the mathematical formulas. Like X equals B, G, or whatever the formula is, for example. But I think, at least on some level, things can be efficient, right? I would use the word efficient. You see? So, yeah. Again, right, wrong doesn't matter. The investigation that's interesting for me. But yeah. I suppose also there's reading books, which is very much on this side, which isn't necessary. I'm not saying it doesn't do it on this side, it does, but isn't as necessary on this side. Whereas it seems to be very necessary on this side. Because that would be more of an external activity, right? Because you've got an external object book that you read, right? External information, whereas this, again, internal knowledge, like, for example, you just sit there and contemplate, and you sit there for 3 hours and you contemplate, and then something, again, divine revelation, it presents itself, you see. But then I suppose, again, especially on the modern Western philosophy, if it is more secular and atheistically materialistic, then it's not going to believe, it's going to believe in the scientific reductionism religion, not so much the, other stuff. So, yeah. Just, yeah. I don't know the huge amount about Western, to be honest with you. Honestly, my favourite when I was younger was Chinese philosophy, because a lot of people talk about Hindu philosophy or Indian philosophy, but I don't know the hugest amount about that either, really. Either Zen as well, and again, there's much more variation of sub schools or subsystems. So there's like Korean philosophy, Japanese Zen, Tibetan Buddhism, Hindu, Jainism, so many, right? I was saying the West is quite a very tight core, a very tiny number, like 2 or 3, right? Again, in the bulk, I know there's outliers and exceptions to the rule and all that stuff, but in the mainstream side, on the bulk mainstream side of it, and yeah, this is just, again, this is more pattern recognition. This isn't maybe in some kind of PhD professor in any type of philosophy or anything like that, but I just recognize gaps in certain things and patterns, right? So again, NTs don't like that I notice patterns, that I just do notice them, and then they gaslight and they say, "No, you didn't notice that," or you're just making up, the kings of gaslighting, right? But I do notice patterns in things, and on the topic of philosophy and the relativist argument itself, it always says that it's correct, but then it says there's no such thing as truth, or if there's no such thing as truth, then it can't be correct, right? And then also, again, the Ouroboros that I've said a dozen times, if there's no such thing as truth, then the statement no such thing as truth is also false, therefore there is such thing as truth, because it again, the snake eats its own tail, Ouroboros, right? So it's the relativism stuff really strange, but never mind. These, again, just more, call it neurodiverse or autistic pattern recognition. So again, it's more of a anyway. But yeah, that's that. And then you follow on from that. This is really quick, because I need to get dinner. Is NT language, normal language, neurotypical language, right? It's going to be like, right, this is just the way it is. It's flipping annoying, but they make up 99.9% of the population, so I'm just going to get on with it at this point, right? I'm not pointing fingers at anyone getting whatever, okay? This is just the way it is, right? Right, there's code. AKA. Right, so these are what I call code translations or bracket translations. So in my world, in my version, in my autism, how I communicate, right, I will say, this is a box, right? BOX, okay? This is a box, right? So, and there's full stop, there's no brackets, it's the end of that, that's box, this shape, this is a square box, right? Yeah, I know it's a rough drawing, just bear with me. This is a box, right? This isn't my autism and then their language, right? So me, so this is me in my language, okay? Right, so in NT language, right? It's very important, okay? It's just the way it is, and they project emotion onto things all the time, so they project all the time. So, right, this is 1 minute dead quick. In their language, right, this box, okay, we've got BOX in normal language, but then, because they project emotion, so that box has certain emotions on it, that they project, they force everything with the neuroticism. So it's a box, and then it's right, and then there'll be a code in there, wink, wink, hint, hint, right, in their language, you know, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, you know, AKA 1, 2, and 3, right? It's dot, dot, dot. It's always dot, dot, dot. So there's a box, right, in their language, right? But that means bracket, you know, code. Here's the bracket, here's the, right? It's a very, and all genders do this, but it's a very sort of feminine kind of thing that they're doing, right? Not female, feminine, right? So I'm not, anyway, it's code translations, right? So for anyone out there who didn't know who's neurodiverse or whatever, in their language, and again, they make up 99.9% approximately the population, so it just really sucks, but it's just the way this language goes, okay? Whenever you're talking, always remember code translations and brackets in their language. Even if you just think you've just said box and it's a neutral, there's no emotion on the box, right? Wrong. The way they receive it is box, therefore box is good or evil, and therefore it means, you know, you want them to do something. There's always a code translation and a bracket and a dot dot dot, right? And a projection of emotion in their language. And that's the end of that. So